Well, I think there's two different ways to look at this building of resilience, this uncertainty. And one is as we're in the middle of this pandemic, people that aren't feeling resilient and are suffering from that uncertainty, what can we do in the short term? And then what also can we do in the long term when we get to the other end of this to build those skills for the next time? Because it won't be a pandemic necessarily, but there is going to be a next time. So, what can we do to have those skills in place so we're more resilient and can handle that uncertainty?
Well, I might jump to the second part of your question first, but you might need to remind me of the first part if I ramble. So I think that there's lots of lessons to be learned, and that's something I also say in the book, is that all the solutions exist somewhere in the world. And, wonderfully, we have great communication tools where we can actually share what people are doing in different parts of the world. And those solutions exist to the climate crisis, but they also exist to some of these other things. So, for instance, in Finland, they have a fake news resilience training scheme in all schools. And it's incredibly effective. It essentially empowers children to be able to know when they're being fed incorrect information and they're going down some horribly dangerous rabbit hole. And that's been really good. And that's a resilience technique. In Holland, they have these bizarre kind of rituals called dropping. And it's kind of the equivalent of the scout movement. They go and drop kids in the wilderness. Like the parents literally drop them off on a Friday night and go, make your own way home. And the wilderness in Holland, admittedly, is nothing like Canada or Australia. But there's, a New York Times journalist went over and investigated and was horrified. But the Dutch actually have a culture of ensuring that their children are tested in this way. Initiation ceremonies in different cultures, provided this role, got us toughened up. So I think there are different things that we can do at a structural level, and we'll need to do that. Milton Friedman, who was sort of the founder of contemporary capitalism or neoliberalism, he has a great phrase that I've heard a few times recently, and he said that a crisis can create incredible change, but it depends on the ideas that align around at the time. So we need to start thinking about these ideas so that when we do emerge, these ideas are the ideas that our leaders pick up and start to cultivate. So it's exciting that these ideas do exist. Now, I think to the first part of the question, which I think will feed into the second part, we, first of all, if people are in this crisis, because we are in this world where we have a lot of children in particular who are really suffering because they haven't had a culture of building resilience, I think I'm probably a little older than you, but we are of a generation that remember when, you were sent out into the street and you couldn't come back inside until dinner time and all of that kind of thing. We love to talk about it. But this younger generation have been cocooned massively by the entire system, technology, consumerism, they don't have to wait for anything. They've grown up with Google. They don't have to wonder about the answer to something, So all of that stuff has weakened that resilient muscle. So I think what we need to do in the first instance immediately to deal with the distress that absolutely, as you say, exists is to start to have discussions about this, actually to normalise discomfort. Yeah, all right, cool. This is really uncomfortable for you. You're meant to be uncomfortable. And so parents, teachers and so on, we need to start saying, yeah, look, I'm really feeling for you. This is really uncomfortable. However, life is uncomfortable. And I find it really helpful. And I found it helpful because I wrote this book during the incredible bushfires we had here. And then the climate crisis that was just escalating. And I was just watching more and more animals being, hitting the extinction list, and then the ramifications around the world of all of this. And then, of course, COVID, and then the Black Lives Matters movement escalating. So I had to kind of regroup myself and think about this very question. And what I found helpful was also reading about other times in history where, hard shit happened and humans actually rallied together and became bigger, more impressive, more loving, and in fact happier people. And one of the best examples or obvious examples is during World War II. Studies were done on the British population. And of course, they got hammered, during the war. And what they found was that it was actually during the middle of the London Blitz that British people were the happiest they've ever been. They're also the healthiest. And essentially, it was because of the camaraderie. They were all bunkering down together, literally in bunkers, as bombs were falling. And the sense of community and camaraderie and belonging and rallying in together to overcome a problem saw them become as happily human as they could be. And countless studies have shown that this is the case. So I think that if we can start to normalise distress, discomfort, tricky times, and discuss it in the framework of this has happened before, and the best thing we can do is face it rather than run from it and hide from it, and have this discussion, read the books. I think that would help. I really do. Other techniques that I explore in the book, you might remember the deer and the tiger example, and somatic therapy, which is becoming quite popular these days, and there's some great therapists, particularly in the US and in Canada. So Philip Shepherd, I think, is a Canadian therapist, and he does some great work in this area. They talk about the idea that we have the flight or fight mechanism, and then we also have the freeze mechanism. And we don't talk about that so much, but once you can no longer outrun a tiger or fight a tiger, you will collapse. So a deer will try to outrun a tiger, eventually will realise it can't, and will collapse in a heap and pretend to be dead. Heart rate stops, breathing stops. For all intents and purposes, it is dead. And it gives the deer a chance, one last chance at life. And so the deer will take its time, perhaps go, oh, it's dead, I'll go and get my cubs, we'll come back, we'll have a nice leisurely lunch, And in that time, the deer has a chance to jerk itself back to life and run for its life. And that's what goes on for us in a crisis. We get overwhelmed by so many of the emotions, the despair, the uncertainty, all the things that you talked about, and as well as anger. There's a lot of anger circulating as well. And what that can do is see us no longer fight, no longer sort of flee, but what we end up doing is we freeze. And so I've noticed over the course of 2020, so many people have gone into this overwhelmed, numb, ascetic space where they just give up. And I think that that's what a lot of children are feeling. Parents are really struggling to get their kids to go to school. There's that phenomenon of school refusal that is happening at incredible rates. And look, it's something that needs to be overcome. And the way we overcome it, the somatic therapists talk about doing what the deer did. We have to jerk ourselves back into gear again. We need to come back online and almost shake off that anxiety that has built up. All of that overwhelming emotion builds up in our body. If we go numb, it stays in there and festers and becomes a full-blown anxious disorder. I'm simplifying things, obviously. However, if we can shake it off physically, which is what we are evolutionarily programmed to do, then we have quite a good chance of dealing with it. So an answer is to go off and do really intense physical exercise. So if somebody in your family or yourself, you're struggling with this overwhelm and this despair, the best thing you can do, and if you're in a place where you can do this, run around the block, go into nature and just climb up some trees and just really do something that will shake all of that emotion out. And if you're in a place where you've got to go into isolation, and I had to do this process because we had quite an extended lockdown here in Australia, and fortunately it did manage to get our cases down to zero, I would dance in my lounge room just for 20 minutes and dance hard. Hopefully the neighbours weren't too perturbed by it. And literally, as Taylor Swift says, shake it off. It's a thing. It's an evolutionary thing we need to do.